Huh. Oh, okay.
Yeah, oh, you got
Oh, yeah. No, that definitely works. And there's no feedback. Wow.
quality.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
No, and then whoever's speaking, they can take their mask off.
okay. I kind of figured that. I mean, my mask is relatively thin, but you can still hear me just fine. And I imagine that. Oh, yeah, that's even better.
Yeah.
guys staying busy?
Trying to. We're not nearly as busy as we were or should be. But trying to stay busy. It's difficult because we have a higher guest count outside.
That's why I sent these people to you.
Yeah, we have a few.
Oh, that's how that works.
Yeah, no, it's a really nice setup. And I'm going to have to get used to that perfect audio set.
Hasn't anyone else arrived?
We have a couple of people, and we do have a live stream for people that are under quarantine or far away from this place. We have some family in Michigan and people from New Hampshire. So we'll give it a few more minutes to see if anybody else meanders in. I say the only thing that I was concerned about is getting this all set up remotely. Every place that I possibly could, made sure that it said 11 o'clock Mountain Time, not 11 o'clock the East Coast. And obviously, since you're here, you managed to, that message came through loud and clear. I am not entirely certain. Yeah. Give it a few more minutes, like another 5 minutes or so. Yes, my mom, Shauna, and her younger brother, Lynn. My mom passed in 2017. Coordinating with Lynn is a challenge, so we're not entirely certain if he'd be showing up or being on the live stream. But then myself, my sister, and then our dad is somewhere around here. Yeah. No, my dad is from the other side of the family. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I was gonna say Lee, along with his older sister Helen, was born in Lawrence, Kansas, and were raised in Hugoton, Kansas, if memory serves correctly. And Great Aunt Helen stayed in Hugoton, Kansas the entire time. Lee had gone off to college, gone into the Air Force. Once got out of the Air Force, met our grandmother Vanita, and I think they spent some time in Rocky Ford, and then after that moved to Boulder, kind of based off of Granddad's needs work-wise. So this part of the country, for the most part. Oh yeah. Yep.
I was from Kansas also. Eastern Kansas, not too far from Lawrence. Many of my friends went to KU. And I always had to hear about KU basketball.
It was a rare event, but it was hard to see Granddad more animated when it was a KU versus Colorado University game.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say because.
I understand. I've had season tickets for 55 years for the CU football games before this year. So we can't play this year though. So.
Yep. She was briefly, yes. Yeah, I say I honestly don't know how long she was there, but I know she wasn't by the time that I was born. But I know that she was involved with it for a handful of years. My sister would know more about the family history than I would.
Well, I think I knew her in something.
Oh, she was involved in a lot of things. Vanita was involved with the Rotary Club, was a real estate agent for many years.
Was she a PEO?
I'm not entirely certain if she was. Kels, do you remember whether or not Vanita was a PEO? She was. Okay. All right. You have a leaf in your head.
Wonderful.
There you go.
Thanks. Yeah, she was actively involved. Can you hear me? She was actively involved in PEO from the time she was about 16 on. Her mother was also a PEO member.
Okay.
It was something that
And I asked if she was a member of Buffalo Bills.
I believe that she was for a few years.
Okay.
I don't know how many years on that front, but I know that they were pretty active. They loved going to the games.
Yes, okay.
They usually bought season tickets. And
Mhm.
I did too. 55 years.
oh, good.
But not this year. I bought them, but we are not playing, so.
Right, so nobody there were no games at all this year, were there?
Now today's paper says they're going to start in November.
Okay. Good.
I,
The last year that they lived at the house was when they were still going, especially to basketball games on Saturdays.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't physically go to football games, but they would go to basketball games.
Hmm. Okay.
a lot of people did, but yeah.
Yeah.
That was what, 3 years ago at least? About
Yeah.
3 years ago?
Yeah.
That makes sense. That 3 years ago they were still attending games.
Did they live out in Gunbarrel?
Yes. Yes.
You did.
Okay, I thought he told me that's where they lived.
They were one of the earlier
Okay.
I believe they bought their house there in, let me think. I think it was 1956.
Okay.
No, I take that back. It was 63 that they
My
were.
dad was a realtor in Boulder, and we still own his office and all of that property downtown Boulder. So, and he helped establish Gunbarrel.
All right. So
Yeah. Wonderful.
think I think we'll get started here. It looks like
Okay.
who we have coming in is filing in, and who we have online is here online, and we'll go ahead and get
I'll,
this started.
Okay, I'll hand the floor over to you.
All right.
Wherever you'd like to sit. It looks like we've got plenty of extra chairs. to
Yes,
talk
very
about.
very fluid, very fluid. All right, so thank you all for arriving both here in person and online through the YouTube stream. My name is Daniel Clark. I am Halbert Lee Sturgeon's grandson by way of his daughter Shauna, and we'd like to thank you for being involved in the celebration of his life. Lee, as he was known to many of us, granddad to myself, was a son, a brother, a husband, a father, an educator, a veteran, a banker, a philanthropist, had his hands involved in so many different projects that honestly it would be hard to recount them all, let alone remember them all. But the part of him that has always impressed me most is his role as an educator, both at Colorado University and in the life lessons that he had passed on to everybody that he had touched. few years ago, shortly after the passing of his wife, my grandmother, Vanita, my sister and I were talking with him about how he envisioned today to go about. And in tried and true sense of humor, his words were quite simply, "Surprise me." Well, within a month after Granddad had passed back in March, our world had come to a screeching halt thanks to COVID. And I can't help but look back and wonder if, in fact, he actually said, "Surprise you." And here we are now with a good number of people watching us remotely where it is nice and safe. We don't have any particular formal flow or itinerary for today, but I figured it would be most important to remember the stories of the way that Lee had impressed on us through the course of his life. And in particular, there is one story that affected me personally, to which I will always be eternally grateful to my granddad, and it is how, simply put, how Granddad saved my life. And I call it a lesson in opposition. When I was in high school, I was almost a straight A student. The rigors of public education came quite easily to me, and very rarely had the need to study or to practice in order to be able to do quite well. When I graduated, Granddad had arranged for us a college fund to take care of our 4 years of a bachelor's degree at whatever sort of university that we wanted to, whatever sort of career that we thought would work out for us well. I chose to go to Michigan Tech in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for computer science, and was faced with the very harsh reality that college life was not anything remotely close to high school life. My near straight A's became barely passing grades, and in many cases having to retake classes. And at the end of my second year, Granddad had set me aside, was obviously rather disappointed with my scholastic process, and had said, from this point forward, you're going to get a 3.0 GPA each quarter. You're not going to drop any classes that you take. If these two requirements are not met, then from that point forward, you're on your own. And I knuckled down, and I managed to make it work for the first couple of quarters. But at the end of the third year, I missed it. 2.8. And sure enough, Granddad held true to his word. Funding was stopped, and I was faced with one of the most difficult choices in my life. To return to Harbor Springs, college dropout, with very little skill set in order to be able to get myself started as a young adult, or to stick it out, to stay at Michigan Tech and find a way of being able to continue my education. I knew that Granddad had meant to hold my feet to the fire in order to impart an important lesson. And the lesson was taught in that moment that if I wanted whatever it is that I wanted out of life, that I had to rely on myself to get the job done. And I stayed. And I managed to make it work. Path took me in a variety of different places, eventually took me to New England, went into the workforce, came back while still working, going to school full time, and managed to get my degree many years later. Now, that's a hard lesson for a young adult to take on. And I'll be honest, there were many years that I was furious with Granddad. That he changed the rules on me, changed the expectations on me. And it was only almost 2 decades after the fact that I realized that that was another avenue of the lesson that he needed to impart, that whatever it is that you want out of this life, you're going to have to work for it yourself. But that also means understanding that situations change, that the only constant in this world is change. 2017 was a very harsh year for our family. In June, we lost my mother, Urshana. In November, we lost our grandmother, Vanita. At the end of November, I lost my wife, Amanda. I'll be honest, I don't remember much of December of that year. As things came back into focus in the beginning part of 2018, and I was trying to put together back some semblance of life, it was those lessons that Granddad had taught me. That if you want something out of this life, you have to work for it. And you cannot rely on things being constant all the time. You have to be able to roll with the punches. And it is for those reasons that years after the fact, Granddad saved my life. I would not be here talking to you today if it wasn't for that lesson and that he imparted on me as a young adult so many years ago. Thank you, Granddad. You are one of the wisest men that I have ever met. And I know full well that only a small percentage of what wisdom that you had been passed on, but we are eternally grateful for it. With that, I will now hand off the podium to whomever else has a story to share. I suspect that my sister Kelsey probably has one or two in mind. But for those of us watching from afar, feel free to comment on how Granddad's life had impacted you. And for those here amongst us today, I offer the same opportunity. Thank you.
Well, hi, I'm Kelsey, Lee's granddaughter. In my way, I am gloriously unprepared for today. But in my own way, I have always been prepared. I suppose if we're going to recount some stories about hard lessons from Granddad, I suppose I'll recount a story of a hard lesson that I taught him. When I was a young kid, speaking of our college education, I had wanted to go to school to become a massage therapist. I had chosen a school that was an all-inclusive trade school. And I was told that I was not allowed to go to a trade school. I was welcome to come to the University of Boulder. I was welcome to go to any other university I chose. But he felt that a massage therapist career was not going to actually be a sustainable career. And I think he realizes now that that was not quite the case. There have been many massage therapists to do well. At any rate, I decided, you know what? I don't want to go to college. And if I can't go to college at where I want to go to college, then I'm going to do my own thing. So I packed my bags and I hit the road and decided I was going to go on a life of adventure. And I decided I would be self-employed and have been self-employed most of my young life. Still to this day, my husband and I have a draperies and upholstery business. But one of the interesting lessons I think I taught him through my steadfastness to stay myself was that sometimes that steadfast nature, that determination, that grit to do it my way, he learned that I was capable of actually pulling up my bootstraps and making sure that the world was going to be what I needed it to be for me. I was always a free spirit, And sometimes that didn't sit well with him or my grandmother or my parents or even my brother. I've always done things in my own time and my own way. And at some juncture over the course of the last 10 years, he realized that it was that determination, that grit, that do it my own way that made me a pretty good candidate to help him actually manage his finances and to help make sure that everything was in order. Not because I was good at planning, not because I was good at making sure every little detail was oriented, but because I had learned how to fly by the seat of my pants like a rock star. So I was so very thankful to finally be accepted for who I was by him, by my grandmother, and to be brought back into the fold, to be given such an important role as a trustee for his trust, and to be his financial advisor towards the end of his life. He gave me quite an empowering stance. I thought it would take years for me to get to a point where I really felt confident about who I was, and him inviting me to take on that role advanced my confidence in ways that I could have never achieved on my own. He had put full faith in me, and I remember one day, this is a little over a year ago, and we were trying to figure out plans for one of my visits here, and we had many meetings with lawyers and accountants, and he looked across and he says, "She's in charge." And I just laughed. I thought, really? I can't believe I was the one put in charge, but I love this. And one of the most important things, one of the last really touching moments that he and I had together was this moment of clarity that he had. He was a very stoic gentleman, as many of you know. He liked a little sense of humor, but otherwise he wasn't the type to get all mushy on you. Well, he got mushy on me one day, and he leans in as I'm giving him a hug. I'm getting ready to head to the airport, and he says, "I want you to make sure you take care of your spirit." And I thought, I don't know who's talking to me right now, but is this actually my grandfather? I think it was. He was able to open himself up, and he was such a graceful elder. I've never known somebody, and many of the medical staff around him commented, "This guy is just so happy." Most people don't live to that age to be content to just sit and watch Fox News and read the newspaper and have gals cook for him, which he was overjoyed to cook for him. And Megan, if you're watching, thank you. You made his meals and his tummy so happy. It was really quite a blessing to be able to coordinate with some of the gals out here. Sarah, a lifesaver. Suchi, his nurse. He loved Suchi to pieces. He loved her. He loved her in ways that I didn't think he'd be able to make those kind of bonds with people that late in life, but he really did. He was the type to make friends with just about anybody. And he really did enjoy all the friends that he made in the last couple of years at Balfour. Thank you guys for coming today. He was a very interesting man, and I recounted this story at my grandmother's funeral, but one of my favorite memories of my grandfather is being 4 or 5 years old, being at the Boulder Country Club, waiting for our table. We would go to the bar, and I would run up in my cute little dress, and I would order a martini for my grandmother, and a scotch on the rocks with a twist, and a Shirley Temple with 2 cherries, please, for me. And then my grandfather and I would dance to the jazz music, and I'd get up on his toes. And of course, he was a very tall man, and I have always been a very short girl. But those were some of my most favorite moments with him, was spinning around that dance floor and in just really enjoying the spirit of who he was. And I'm really thankful for having those memories so clear still all these years later. And really blessed to have such a wonderful man in my life. Yeah, I'm not sure what else I'd have to say. Aside from, I think I'd like for my dad to tell a story about his love of cars, if you'd like, Dad. Okay.
My name's David Clark. I'm Dan and Kelsey's father, and I was married to Lee and Vanita's daughter, Shauna. And as young people and new to the family, Lee and I struggled a little bit to make a bond of friendship between us. And he discovered that I had a fondness for cars. And he had a fondness for cars. He had quite a fondness for cars. If you ever knew him, he always found one that might be unique and bought it and drove it and admired it. And when I first met him, he had a Mercedes-Benz convertible, a little 58 dark chocolate brown car, and it was quite a thing. And one day when we were down for a visit, he and I went off for a drive somewhere, and he let me drive. And that was fun. It was pretty special to have a father-in-law that liked things that I liked. And he had interest in cars in other ways too. He thought it would be a lot of fun to have back in those. This was in the 70s. There was a kit car that was popular. It's called a Bradley GT, where you bought an old Volkswagen or one that was not so old and took the body off and bought a fiberglass body and put it on the Volkswagen, and you had this sporty little car to drive around. And so we toyed with the idea that this would be a project that he and I would take on. And he went so far as to buy a Volkswagen that he thought would be a candidate for this. And he was pretty beat up otherwise, but it would work, or we thought it would work. Well, about the time when the project was about to launch, the guys who made the body stopped making the body, and that project was out the window. And he went on to have other cars. He had an Opel GT that was a lot of fun to drive. His son Lynn and I used to take that for ski trips. He and I would go for ski trips. Wish he was here today. Maybe he's watching. But he made a point of finding that connection that we could share. And I was always grateful for that. He was the calm in the family drama that would exist sometimes between mother and daughter. I never felt like I was targeted in the drama, but I was there. And Lee and I were there. And Lee was the calm one on his side, and I was the calm one on my side. And I was just very glad to know him. Very glad to know that he was such a friendly guy, and I've heard things from these two I hadn't heard before. Not like that. Very well done. Thank you for sharing that. I don't really have a lot else. I always admired him. Admired his achievements and admired his ability to make friends and stay the course. And this last year and a half of his life, learning from Kelsey some of the things that have been going on with his life and the end of his life, made me sad I wasn't a part of that family for any longer than I was. So. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching.
So one of the people that knew him best toward the tail end of Granddad's life would be his caretaker and longtime friend, Sarah, that I would like to invite. I'm sure, if nothing else, just a day in the life of Lee Sturgeon.
Oh, how funny. So I was
Lee and Vanita's housekeeper and became his personal friend and his caretaker. And he was like a grandfather to me, who I don't have any grandparents left. And I felt it my duty to stand up and take care of this poor man who I just truly adored. My children adored him, and he was good to them and very sweet. Lee was a funny man because he only liked meat and potatoes. He liked wine. He liked scotch. And he liked chocolate. Anything covered in chocolate. No vegetables, no nothing, but he just liked chocolate. Chocolate anything. And when he was still driving, my mom and I would go over there sometimes, and one day when they were moving from the house to Balfour, my mom and I were helping him do some stuff and loading up clothes and taking things, and he had a candid conversation with my mom, and I was late getting to the house, and they spent about half hour outside talking to each other about how Vanita and Lee, through their military travels, lived in Southern California. Well, my family grew up in Southern California. And Lee told my mom that he would go and do his service and his job during the day. And then they would drive all the way out to, and they lived outside of LA, and they would get all dressed up and drive into Hollywood every night. So they would go dinner and dancing every single night. So they would take an hour and a half, 2 hour drive to go to Hollywood and then come back home. And every day that they would go and just party it up. And I thought that was just totally crazy, because if anybody knows LA, you don't go anywhere because it takes forever. But he just was an interesting man. I don't even know where to begin. You know, he was a smartass when he wasn't supposed to be. And you wanted just to pinch him because he was such a turd sometimes. And yet he would smile, and he knew that he was being sarcastic and a smartass. But he had the right to be, you know, and damn, he loved watching Fox News, and he loved every sport on that was there. He would have it all lined out and highlighted every day. And there was a brief time between, January and a certain time where there was really no sports on because he wouldn't watch hockey. And it was starting, basketball season and football. It was like, thank you. There's something on TV for him to watch. But I don't know. I mean, he was a lovely man. He just was funny. And it's funny because I only knew Lee. I knew Vanita more, but I got to know Lee better after Vanita passed. So Lee and I would be two ships in the night and pass, and he'd say goodbye to me, and he'd be at his desk all day watching Fox News upstairs, and Vanita, your grandmother, would be off doing her either planning for parties, getting ready for parties, or going to go play bridge somewhere. She was always on the go. She had 10 things going on at one time, all the time. And Lee was just, as we call it, Lee was the arm candy to your grandmother. You know? Because she would go, he didn't like the social events, he said, I don't like to play bridge, but I'm just here because she wants me to be here. And they had bridge groups together. And he says he was a terrible bridge player, but he did it anyway because she loved it. And it was a social thing for them to do, to get together for dinners with their friends and so forth. But he was the arm candy, and she ran the show. You know, she was the full-time driver, and he just was like, okay, I'm coming. You know, and he did his best, and he loved her. So he was a good man. I miss him. I miss my daily visits. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Oh, there was one funny story. So, one time Lee was really bored, and I put this in the cars that Lee and the girls figured out how to use on-demand movies on Comcast. And the girls called me and said, you won't believe it. We're watching Sex and the City. So we thought it was something totally different, that it was a movie about sex.
So for those of us watching through the stream, my apology is for the wandering mic. Apparently, one of the bits from the last little bit that Granddad was staying at Balfour was, if I'm understanding this correctly, discovering that the cable box that we provided him with had on demand, and on his own accord started to watch Sex in the City. And not entirely certain if he knew what he was getting into or not. And an interesting movie. Well, we learn something new every day, even in now. Given the turnout and the interaction in with YouTube and how people are able to convey stories, I'll believe we'll end the stream with one last story of when I was young. And this would have been when I was 12 or 13 or so. Granddad and I would go on a motorcycle trip. Granddad, in addition to loving cars, also loved his motorcycles and would drive around the country on a regular basis. Sometimes taking our grandmother, sometimes not, often with friends, and they would do road trips for days at a time, crisscrossing all over the U.S., sometimes up into Canada. I believe there was a trip into Europe, but don't quote me on that one. And the one time that he and I took a motorcycle trip, it was up through the mountains of Colorado and over into Utah, which is the furthest west I've ever been, and through to a couple of dinosaur dig sites. Now, 12-year-old Dan was huge into dinosaurs, just like most young boys were. And so being able to see a partial Tyrannosaurus Rex in the process of being uncovered from the side of a cliff face was an absolute thrill. You learn quickly when you're at that age and you're riding on the back of the motorcycle that you hang on for your life. Just because those windy roads on a motorcycle, you have to lean into the turn a bit. It was one of the times that he and I bonded as grandfather and grandson, and had the opportunity to be able to see him in action, how he interacted with just general people on the street, how he interacted with other motorcyclists that we would come across. Having the hilarious difficulty of setting up and tearing down the tent every night. I am absolutely certain that we had indeed lost one of the metal rods from the tent, but he would never admit that we did. Just insisted that the tent had to be tied up to a tree at some point in order for it to stand upright. But that was one of the times that as we traveled for around 4 or 5 days or so, had the opportunity to get past the initial joys of grandson coming over for a short visit, but actually get a chance to see how Granddad kept us calm when we had a rainstorm, navigated through a small side highway when there was a detour, and being able to see practicing what he preached in dealing with how life changes and keeping you on your toes. It was a good time. It was a good time, and I'll miss it, and I'll miss him. If there's anybody else that wishes to come up to share a story, by all means, let me know now. Otherwise, I believe Kelsey still has one more, so we'll keep the stream going for a little bit longer.
So you had recounted that there might have been a trip to Europe, and you were recounting stories of how my granddad was kind of the arm candy for my grandmother. And that was kind of true. I can see that. He had those beautiful blue eyes, and he was really quite the looker. He was a handsome fella. I showed pictures to friends of mine. Wow, your granddad was handsome. He was. So my granddad really loved his motorcycles, and that was his getaway. He and his buddies, Ed Mock, if you're out there, these boys went on trips every year. So my granddad decided that he'd like to take a motorcycle trip through the Swiss Alps, or the French Alps, or whichever country. Anyways, as soon as my grandmother heard wind that he was planning a trip to Europe to go to the Alps, She insisted, I want to come too. Well, I've never been and I want to go see the Alps, she says. It was not like her to want to jump on board his plan and be his arm candy for the minute. Wasn't really her MO. She never wanted to get on a motorcycle. But he said, if you're coming with me to the Alps, you're going to have to ride a motorcycle. I think she probably went into shock, and then she thought about how badly she wanted to see the Alps. And then she went out and bought a motorcycle outfit. So the two of them, they went to the Alps and they rented a BMW motorcycle, and they went on this tour with a large group of people and that stopped every night at a new bed and breakfast, and they would stop for their lunches. And he was so tickled that she finally, after 50 years, decided to get on a motorcycle. So this was only about, I don't even think this was 20 years ago. This was about 18 years ago that they made this trip. Well, my grandfather was so cautious. He knew that she was not a skilled passenger on a motorcycle. And she was up on the back of the motorcycle one day as they're pulling out of the parking lot from lunch. And he was not used to a BMW. He drove a Honda Goldwing most of his motorcycle career. And he took a wrong turn, and as he's pulling backwards, and ended up putting that motorcycle down right on his leg to save my grandmother from getting pinched underneath the motorcycle. He broke his foot. They had to come home. They didn't get to finish their trip through the Alps, but it was still one of his very favorite motorcycle trips, just because she came with him. So I wanted to share that one. Thank you all for coming and joining us online today. Granddad, thanks for all the lessons and all the fun stories.
So thank you again for all coming out to remember Halbert Lee Sturgeon with us. I'm sure wherever he's at right now, he is smiling in that wry, I know something you don't smile that he would have from time to time. For those of you watching from afar, thank you for your attendance, and we certainly appreciate it. Hope everyone has safe travels, and thank you.